forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday on GB News, it's Bev Turner Today from 10 a.m. We're going to be here for you, our GB News family, to keep you up to date, but also make you smile.
The guy went from puberty to adultery.
And I can't wait to bring a few of my own opinions.
I have no time for cultural totalitarianism.
We'll engage in passionate, but always polite debate, with your thoughts and opinions at the centre of it all. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We are GB News, and we'd like to say thank you to each and every one of you for bringing us your conversations, for helping our great nation find its voice. We are here for you on radio, television, and online, across England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland.
It's not the BBC, you actually get your facts right.
We are proud to be GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. for Gloria Meets. In exclusive interviews, I'll be finding out who our politicians really are and what they really think.
It's something that you would never want anyone to suffer.
I didn't know what channels there were. B, I didn't think I'd be believed.
I must have weighed about 7 stone and I'm 5'8".
My instincts was to sort of cover this up. I mean, clearly that was a mistake.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel. He's the king of breakfast TV, and he's back.
Eamon Holmes, back on the TV with me this morning.
Even remember my name.
I know, it's been 4 months. You have holy water by your bed?
Oh, yes.
Oh,
already to bless.
Yeah. Oh, Eamon.
Oh.
Why do you not believe anything I say?
Eamon Holmes back on GB News Breakfast at 6 a.m.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics, and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hi, Andrew Pierce here. Join me every Friday lunchtime for a proper no-nonsense debrief of the week's events. With special guests in the studio and the GB News team on the ground, I'll be getting you up to date with news, some intelligent discussion, and my own sharp take. The weekend starts here with me every Friday lunchtime on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Has the Labour Party put the scourge of anti-Semitism behind it? Or is it a little bit more complicated than that? This morning we look at the Labour Party, we look at NATO, we look at a scientific superpower. The Prime Minister is meeting Bill Gates today. And also, why is a police force in Britain being asked to spend £1 million on a broken radio mast? All that to come after the headlines.
Good morning, it's just gone 9:30. I'm Bethany Elsey with your top stories from the GB newsroom. The Labour leader has apologised on behalf of the party for its previous handling of anti-Semitism. Sir Keir Starmer says Labour is unrecognisable from when Jeremy Corbyn was leader in 2019 and confirmed that Mr Corbyn will not stand again at the next general election. It comes as the Equality and Human Rights Commission has announced it's taking the party out of special measures. The watchdog demanded Labour make changes after ruling it was responsible for unlawful acts of harassment and discrimination in 2020. Sir Keir Starmer said action, not just an apology, was needed.
To all those who were hurt, to all those who were let down, to all those driven out of our party who no longer felt it was their home, who suffered the most appalling abuse. Today, on behalf of the entire Labour Party, I say sorry. What you've been through can never be undone. Apologies alone cannot make it right.
The rate of UK inflation has fallen for the third month in a row, but remains in double digits. Data from the Office for National Statistics shows the Consumer Price Index fell to 10.1% in January, down from 10.5% in December. The drop was largely due to the price of fuel and transport slowing. Chancellor Jeremy Hunt says the fight to reduce inflation is far from over. A boy and a girl, both aged 15, have been charged with the murder of a 16-year-old girl who was stabbed to death in Cheshire. Brianna Jai from Warrington was found seriously injured on a pavement near Linear Park on Saturday afternoon. She died a short time later. Cheshire Police says they're exploring whether the teen, who was transgender, was the victim of a hate crime. Candlelit vigils have been held in Bristol and Liverpool in her memory. The White House now says it doesn't think 3 high-altitude objects that were shot down by the military at the weekend are linked to China. One object was downed over Alaska, another over Canada's Yukon Territory, and a third was shot down over Lake Huron in Michigan. US intelligence believes the unidentified objects could be commercial and that they're likely benign. It's after concerns they could be linked to a suspected Chinese spy balloon that was shot down off the coast of South Carolina 11 days ago. You're up to date on TV, online and DAB+ radio. This is GB News. Now it's back to Tom.
Good morning, it's 9:34 and this is The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, on your TV and your radio. Now, first this morning, Britain's equality watchdog has announced that it will end its monitoring of the Labour Party 2 years after a damning report into the handling of anti-Semitism complaints under Jeremy Corbyn was published. The Labour Party was found to have had political interference into complaints, and indeed there was found to be unlawful harassment of Jewish Labour members. Well, what's changed? Darren McCaffrey can join us now from East London, where Sir Keir Starmer has been speaking this morning. Darren, what's new?
Yeah, very good morning, Tom. I think the Labour Party really viewed today as the turning of not just a page, I think a chapter on what had been a pretty stained period in the history. You have to remember the Labour Party a couple of years ago, immediately after Jeremy Corbyn actually left as leader, were investigated by the Equality and Human Rights Commission, only the second political party after the BNP in this country to be investigated by EHRC. And that's a pretty low point for the Labour Party. As you say, after years of allegations of discrimination around anti-Semitism in the Labour Party, with Jeremy Corbyn being viewed as an anti-Semite. In fact, there was an opinion poll carried out just ahead of the 2019 election in which almost 9 in 10 Jewish people felt that Jeremy Corbyn was anti-Semitic. Clearly the party had a problem. The party was put into special measures, actually, by Keir Starmer a couple of years ago. They've been going through a process of trying to change, to put in procedures to ensure that discrimination cannot take place. And it's been announced this morning by the Equality and Human Rights Commission that that process is now at an end, that Labour have effectively turned the corner, if you like, Tom. I think what's new today is that we've heard from Keir Starmer, obviously welcoming this report. Again, saying, though, they're not celebrating it. They want to apologise for what has gone on in the past. And we heard from Margaret Hodge, of course, one of those Labour MPs who've been very, very critical of what's gone on under Jeremy Corbyn's leadership. I think there are two things that are notable, though. First of all, a pretty strong, punchy message from Keir Starmer saying, effectively, if you do not like this change in the Labour Party, if you do not like my leadership, there is one way out, and that is out through the door, i.e. leave the party if you're not happy. And second of all, a pretty emphatic answer from Keir Starmer on Jeremy Corbyn's position that he will not be standing as a Labour candidate at the next general election. Now, there was also recognition that anti-Semitism has not gone away. We've seen even this week reports of a councillor getting involved, allegations against a Labour councillor with anti-Semitism. But in the end, and Keir Starmer said that you can never get rid of it totally, the fight will always continue. But this is a sign, I think, or a real attempt by Keir Starmer to show that things have changed in the Labour Party, that there is now a big difference, a big distance between him and Jeremy Corbyn. The question, of course, is how will the Jewish community respond to this? And it does seem, I think we were listening to some of the leaders in the hall and indeed elsewhere over the last couple of days, a sense that they do think that progress has been made, that things have changed, but they emphasise that they do not believe that the job is complete.
Now, I suppose the proof will be in the eating of the pudding. Darren McCaffrey, thanks for joining us there from East London, where Sir Keir Starmer has been speaking this morning. Of course, Sir Keir Starmer did serve in Jeremy Corbyn's shadow cabinet. He makes the argument he was making the case from the inside. We didn't hear much about him on the outside through those years. But moving on, the United Kingdom's maritime rescue services were being warned they're likely to see migrant boat crossings over a much wider stretch of southern coastline in the year ahead. GB News can reveal that people smugglers are increasingly launching small boats much further south along the French coast to try and avoid robust police patrols around Calais and Dunkirk. Our Home and Security editor Mark White has this exclusive report.
Racing out from the French coast, a local lifeboat crew responding to reports of a small migrant boat in difficulties. But this incident, also involving a French border patrol vessel, is far away from the usual small boat routes out of Dunkirk and Calais. In fact, we're south of Boulogne, more than 50 miles from those routes. It's one of dozens of rescues the lifeboat based in Berck has attended in recent months, a major uptick in activity as people smugglers attempt to avoid increasing police patrols further north.
The numbers have been rising. At the end of 2021, we were involved in many migrant rescues. During 2022, there were significantly more migrants. The further they have to travel by boat, the higher the risks. Travelling from down the coast brings extra dangers. Being in the water for longer brings the danger of hypothermia and even being hit by bigger boats.
For the people smugglers, increased police activity around Dunkirk and Calais has made their regular launch points more difficult to operate from. French authorities are also busy erecting miles of extra security fencing around those beaches, and that's driving the small boats further south. For years, the criminal gangs have predominantly used the shortest route to the UK, pushing off first from the beaches around Calais, then expanding to include areas near Dunkirk. While occasional boats have been launched further south, in the past 6 months, this route, using beaches near Boulogne, has seen a significant spike in activity, with a beach even further south near Fort Man also now regularly being used. And for maritime patrols in UK waters, that means a far greater likelihood that small boats will begin showing up on a much longer stretch of UK coastline in the year ahead. It'll mean rescue teams across a wider area being called out more regularly to boats that have been in the water for many hours.
It does put a lot of pressure on the resources. You know, these boats are constructed for one purpose, to shift mass numbers of people, but they're designed, and constructed very poorly. They're not expected to be standing up to any real sea conditions, the amount of people that they are loaded with. So by crossing from further south and spending longer at sea, every second that they're at sea longer than they need to be is just going to increase that risk and that chance of another disaster.
There's little doubt, say maritime rescue experts, that those making small boat crossings from further down the French coast will be at far greater risk, with predictions that up to 80,000 people could attempt to cross in the year ahead. Authorities on both sides of the channel will be stretched to the limit. Mark White, GB News.
Well, thanks to Mark for that exclusive report. But moving on this morning, while recess might calm things down for backbench members of Parliament, it's full steam ahead for the Prime Minister, who is today set to meet Bill Gates at Imperial College London. The two California billionaires, well, almost, will be discussing shared priorities, which include innovation, green tech and life sciences. Can these areas really power UK growth through this decade? Well, I'm delighted to be joined now by Stian Westlake, CEO of the Royal Statistical Society. And Stian, this does seem to be a bit of a passion project for the Prime Minister. He created a new government department all about science, innovation and technology. And now he's meeting with Bill Gates.
Yeah, that's right. And I think, in some ways, I'm very optimistic about this. Seeing science and technology getting a seat at the cabinet table, something it hasn't had for years, seeing a focus on trying to build these international partnerships, this could be really encouraging. And if it's done in the right way, it could give us the fillip to growth that the UK really needs.
What are we expecting to come out of this meeting today? Rishi Sunak, I believe, has met Bill Gates before, but is there anything specific in terms of partnership that we're expecting to come out, or is this sort of just another statement of intent?
Bill Gates works in some really interesting areas that are very relevant to the UK. So life sciences is the big one. This is obviously a big strength for the UK and something that we would want to double down on. But he also does some very interesting work in nuclear power. He's a big funder both of the next generation of nuclear energy and of fusion, which is something that the UK has a lot of strengths in. So I'd like to think there are a lot of opportunities for specific partnerships that could develop out of this, as well as good intentions.
Nuclear is such an interesting point because, of course, the UK has been so very slow on getting nuclear power stations built over the last, really, few decades. We've only managed to construct or begin to construct 2 new power stations in recent history. And compare that to the rate at which other competitor countries have been building them. We've been very far behind on this.
Yeah, that's right. And this feels like a really long-term missed opportunity. If we look at a country like France, which has been building nuclear power stations right through from the 70s, the 80s, the 90s, they have really strong energy security. They have managed to take a lot of the carbon emissions out of their grid because they've really invested for a long time. So they have those skills, they have those industrial know-how to do this. It's something we as the UK really need to work on. But, as they say, the best time to have done this would be 40 years ago. The next best time is to start now.
And yet, the political challenges in terms of getting Sizewell C built, for example, have been enormous. Strong local campaigns have been against this sort of development, this sort of construction, frankly, this sort of growth. How can the government get around that issue that very often, whether it's new labs that need to be built, new power stations, or frankly, as the last government found when it tried to extract shale gas in this country, there is simply overwhelming opposition?
It's a really tough question. It's one that's dogged governments for decades. But I think there are genuine things that you can do. I think there's been some really interesting work done by campaign groups like Britain Remade, looking at how you can persuade people that they're happy to have, for example, wind turbines near them. And one of the propositions that they've come up with is to say, if you want to have wind turbines near you, we will give you energy price reductions, we'll give you cheaper bills. So it makes it a choice for communities to have, and it allows them to share in some of this economic growth, some of the benefit that we get from this investment. Making it a proposition that works for individual communities is, I think, the only way you can make this happen.
That's really interesting because, of course, it's something that Jacob Rees-Mogg was looking at doing with shale gas. Sort of people that lived near fracking sites would be able to get big discounts. If we can do that, perhaps not with shale, but with other technologies, that might well be a way to sort of move forward with a win-win style situation. Just finally, Stian Westlake, when might we start to see some of this change actually take place in this country, some of this new innovation, science and technology come about? Because this government does not have long left in office.
It's a good point. I mean, we know that the new team, the new ministers, Michelle Donnell and George Freeman, they're experienced, they know the sector, they are really getting down to work quickly. The benefits take a while to come, but the good news is this is something that the UK has been gradually building up its investment for quite a while. So we've been investing more in R&D for the last 5 years. I'd like to think this is a time now where if we do the right things, making it easier to build, for example, around places like Cambridge and Oxford and London, the benefits could be realised quickly and maybe even in time for the politicians' timelines. Fingers crossed.
Well, Stian Westlake, thank you for that optimistic conclusion to this segment of the show. Really appreciate your time and your thoughts this morning. Now, from one element of planning to another. Anyone who's been watching the new series of Clarkson's Farm will know how broken our local planning system is right across the United Kingdom. But this new story from Durham really takes the biscuit. At a time of worries of rising crime and stretched budgets, Durham County Council's Planning Committee is now forcing the local police force to spend more than £1 million not on keeping communities safe, but in order to maintain a broken former radio mast that it wants to demolish. Yes, this concrete tripod was erected in 1968 and was damaged while being moved in 2017. The police would save £800 million by demolishing this brutalist structure, but the council are demanding that this unused mast gets re-erected on the grounds of, quote, architectural significance. Yes, architectural significance. Well, let's try and make some sense of this now. Bill Edgar is the local democracy reporter at the Northern Echo who broke this story, and I'm delighted to say joins me now. Bill, thanks for making the time this morning. What on earth is going on here? Why is the local police force in Durham expected by the council to spend £1 million on something that most people might see as utterly useless?
Well, this first started out as just as a small item, what I thought initially on a local planning meeting, but turned into something much bigger when I got there. I didn't quite realise, like you said there, how proud and how much architectural and historical significance that this structure supposedly has in Durham. There was even one councillor who said that knocking down this structure would be like knocking down Durham Cathedral, and we all know how beautiful Durham Cathedral is on the local landscape there. So I think that just really kind of encapsulates how proud people are of Durham's heritage.
It's interesting because I lived in Durham for 3 years. The cathedral is truly beautiful. There are many parts, I mean, the castle as well, an architectural masterpiece. Something that I didn't really notice in my time in that city was a large concrete radio mast. I'm not sure I would put it in the same category. Frankly, I'm not sure many people in this country would put it in the same category. Is this a case of just a small minority of very motivated campaigners getting their way above the views of perhaps what might be a silent majority?
Well, yeah, it's interesting that you say that, because in the planning meeting there was, I think there was 12 councillors who went with the rejection of the demolition, but there was 2 councillors who called for a deferment to have a chat between the council and the police to say, you know, what can we do here? You know, is there a way we can work around this? Because they said they recognise that, you know, the police are going through a lot of, you know, issues with funding at the moment, but ultimately it was just rejected. So the police have now come back and said, look, we're going to have a chat with the Crime Commissioner's office and we're going to see if there's a way around this.
Because it is interesting, the Police and Crime Commissioner locally seems to be against this move that the council has decided upon, despite being from the same political party. And clearly the police don't want to be spending £1 million on, frankly, useless concrete, when they could be spending this on policing communities.
Yeah, well, the Police and Crime Commissioner, Joy Allen, has just come out in the past few days saying, you know, households in County Durham will have to pay up to £15 more towards the police precinct. So they're already having to hike the prices up, you know, at the cost of the public's pocket. So this is just kind of adding even more into that financial burden of the police. You know, they say that police community support officers, also known as PCSOs, who, you know, are the not so much the officers, but, you know, sometimes volunteers and just, you know, people throughout the community, they might have to cut that recruitment, and that would have a detrimental impact on crime.
Well, Bill Edgar, I hope you keep on this story and we'll maybe get back in contact with you if there's some sort of conclusion here. It seems like the most extraordinary decision. But thank you so much for joining us this morning, Bill Edgar, the local democracy reporter at the Northern Echo. Now, finally, this morning, we're turning our eyes over to Brussels, where the NATO defence ministers are meeting. Topics high on the agenda today will include continued support for Ukraine, security threats posed by so-called spy balloons, and, of course, the expansion of NATO membership. Well, Peter Caddick-Adams is a NATO historian, journalist and ex-reserve officer and joins me now. Peter, thank you for joining us this morning. NATO seems to have become a more significant part of political discourse and indeed all of our lives in the last 12 months. Does that extra political weight to the organisation change how it's run?
No, there's always been a significant sort of political element of NATO. And that's possibly in the absence, really, of an established EU foreign policy or an EU army. I mean, we won't get into that debate, but it does mean that NATO is the primary role, is the primary actor, really, for security in Europe. It always has been. It's got that institutional knowledge that carried us through the Cold War. And so it's the most important bulwark, really, against Russian aggression that we've seen in the last 12 months.
And of course, we're seeing two new members joining, some of those Nordic countries that have traditionally not been a member of NATO, have sort of been inspired to come on board now. Does that change the dynamic?
It makes NATO immeasurably stronger. Finland and Sweden are the two countries we're talking about, who have always played their own version of neutrality and threatened, obviously, by Russia to the east. Sweden particularly is interesting because it was always neutral during the Second World War, for example. It was one of those places that escapers tried to reach. So for Sweden particularly to opt to join NATO, and of course this is all in the balance because of Turkey's veto, which President Erdogan is still debating over. And this is where, things like supporting the earthquake victims in Turkey will come into play. So there are many sort of wheels within wheels. But the important thing is this two-day NATO summit. It comes hard on the heels of President Zelensky's tour of Europe. The two are quite clearly connected. And this is to discuss, China comes into it, spy balloons comes into it, but really this is to discuss the coming year in Ukraine and how we really must carry on the support and, if anything, ramp it up so that Russia doesn't run riot over Ukraine. And actually, Ukraine is given a chance to move the Russians beyond its frontiers.
Yes, reports this morning that Ben Wallace is asking for more money in the budget for our defence department. Although it must be said the United Kingdom has been meeting its NATO target for quite some time, whereas many of our compatriots in the organisation have not. Is the United Kingdom still this leading European power within NATO?
It certainly is. There's been a lot of criticism that's come from the United States and within Europe that the United Kingdom somehow is unable to sort of match its rhetoric. That's certainly not true. There's a perception around the world of British professionalism. That's why the Ukrainians have turned to the United Kingdom, Canada and the US up for their training. And of course, we were one of the first to come in with weapons and equipment right from the word go. This isn't just over the last 12 months. This is going back to 2014, 9 years ago, when the Russians first invaded. And we've been there solidly. The debate now has moved on to sort of, we don't have enough ships, we don't have enough tanks. But we're still at the forefront of design. We're still at the forefront of equipment and capability. What we do in the United Kingdom is we have a capability for every possible scenario. And most of our NATO compatriots in Europe just have niche capabilities, and that's the difference. So we can go anywhere and do anything with our armed forces. They are the most versatile in the world, but most of our European colleagues can't, and they don't have that capability because they've run down their systems right across the
really,
range.
really interesting distinction there. Peter Caddick-Adams, thank you so much for talking us through this two-day NATO summit, which of course concludes today. Well, that's all we've got time for today on the programme. Thanks for joining us. Up next, it's Bev Turner Today.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
Do you not believe in prisons? I don't believe in prisons. I'm completely stunned.
I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV.